My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask pardon for my sins and the grace to make these moments of prayer fruitful. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. Well, Jesus, we encountered you today doing something that it seems you had to do an awful lot on your time here on earth, which was to correct the vision of some people who didn't understand exactly what you were on about. And as it happens on this occasion, it is yet again the Pharisees whom you are correcting. Well, as I say, we see you correcting people's vision all the time, and reality is that we probably see that in our own lives too, that many times you have to correct our vision of things. Maybe not by speaking to us directly like you did to these Pharisees today, but through the means that your church gives us. You correct our vision a lot. I have to admit, sometimes when I look at these things in the gospel, I think to myself, well, surely it must have got to the point where you at times would have got kind of frustrated or tired of having to answer all these probably what seemed like inane or mundane questions, trying to correct the most basic ideas about what you were explaining. And then I think, well, maybe not, because maybe also that is like it is with us, that many times when we encounter people in our life who don't understand you, who don't understand your message, we sit down and we explain it to them, and actually it brings us a lot of joy to explain the faith to people. It brings us a lot of joy to explain who you are. And I can't help but think that maybe in spite of what seems to have been a frustrating enterprise again and again to explain the most basic things, for you it wouldn't have been like that. It would have been much more the joy of having the opportunity to explain something again, to explain something that was at the very heart of what you wanted to talk about. And of course, we don't know exactly what intention the Pharisees had. I mean, it could have been, as the Gospel seemed to depict the Pharisees to us on various occasions, that these Pharisees didn't really want to understand your message, but they were looking for something different. They wanted to accuse you of something or to have something they could hold against you. Maybe that was the case today. We don't know. The Gospel doesn't tell us. But we know that even if they were looking to question you for bad reasons, they still served your purpose because they gave you an opportunity to talk. And in fact, the opportunity that they gave you to talk today is something that has landed its way into the Gospels and has taught humanity for 2,000 years. The same thing happens to us. Maybe we're not going to put things in writing that are going to help people for 2,000 years, but even if people question us about things that maybe they don't really want to understand, maybe they're just poking fun at us, maybe they're questioning us for the wrong reasons, we know that somehow that's going to help. Somehow it's going to help because there'll be other people who will hear, or because a little part of that stays with them and it helps them later on, even though they don't realize at the time when we tell them. What we see in all this, that there's a certain harmony between what you did here on earth and what we do here on earth too. Concretely, today's Gospel tells us that Jesus was once asked by the Pharisees when the kingdom of God was coming, and he responds, "The kingdom of God is not coming with things that can be observed." And then he continues, "In fact, the kingdom of God is among you." Well, that idea that it comes not with things that can be observed is something that's fundamentally important for us, because it's all too easy for us to look for observable patterns. Basically, what we're talking about here is material things. That somehow we want to see the kingdom of God, but the kingdom of God is not seen, not like that. The kingdoms that are seen are things that are temporal, very earthly reigns. And yet the church, which is the kingdom of God present on earth in a certain sense, has seen not just emperors come and go, but entire empires come and go. She has seen not just kings rise and fall, but whole kingdoms rise and fall. And this even goes for things that most people wouldn't even have heard of. I remember I was talking with a friend of mine who comes from Kenya, and he told me about a fellow called Mansa Musa, who was the king of Mali. Now, I should point out that being from Kenya doesn't exactly make you the next door neighbour of Mali. Kenya is about as far away from Mali as it is away from England, so it's not by any stretch of the imagination next door. But for whatever reason, this fellow knew a little bit about the king Mansa Musa of Mali, and he was explaining to me that he is one of the richest people who has ever lived on earth. And, for example, just to explain how absurdly wealthy this fellow was, Being a good Muslim, he decided to go one day to Mecca to make his pilgrimage to Mecca. And being so wealthy, he decided to take a few people with him. In fact, he took 60,000 men along with him, all of them dressed in fine robes, and amongst those around about 12,000 slaves, and each of those slaves carrying almost 2 kilos of gold. Now that's an enormous quantity of gold. I mean, that's enough to buy anything you could conceivably want. But that wasn't enough for Mansa Musa. He also brought with him 80 camels, each of which bore up to 130 kilos of gold. So we're talking about crazy wealth. He was so wealthy that on that pilgrimage to Mecca, he changed the financial situation of the land through which he passed just by the gold that he left there. This guy was undeniably incredibly rich, one of the wealthiest people who has ever lived. And yet, nowadays, most people wouldn't even know he ever existed. His capital was Timbuktu. I don't know how Timbuktu was when he was the king. It surely must have been pretty impressive. If he had so much gold, he would have had an absolutely spectacular palace. But nowadays, Timbuktu is a small town of around 30,000 people in the middle of Mali, destitute and basically unknown. Well, clearly Jesus is talking about a different kind of kingdom. That's not the kind of thing he's interested in. Not just because he doesn't want something that's going to pass away, but because he's not interested in gold. He's not interested in creating something that's going to stay here in front of men. Not even like St. Peter's Basilica. We look at things that the church has and they're spectacular. They're great things that speak in human language of the glory of God. But that's not what Jesus is talking about. He wants a very different kind of kingdom, and that's what he has. And that's what he means when he says, the kingdom of God is among you, because he was referring to himself. The kingdom which is present nowadays, which is not what theologians call the eschatological kingdom, the kind of heavenly kingdom that will come at the end of time. But the kingdom of God that we have now is something which opens the door to eternity for people. So, where does this leave us then? As we were contemplating at the beginning of our time of prayer today, we share a lot in common with the ministry of Jesus Christ, and we share this in common with him too, that as crazy as it sounds, as impossible as it sounds, we are the kingdom of God on earth. Well, we think about that and it seems absolutely crazy because when we look at ourselves, we realize that we are so far from being perfect examples of the kingdom of God. Alongside Jesus Christ, I mean, what are we possibly going to say? But then we realize that there were people who failed to see God in Jesus Christ himself. Now, I mean, that should be mind-blowing. That God became man, and people failed to see God in him. People failed even to see goodness in him. There were some people who were so opposed to him, they had him crucified. Of course, we know that was in a certain sense just fulfilling the plan that God had foreseen from all eternity. But at the same time, we can't escape this shocking fact that God became man, and people failed to recognize God or even goodness in him. And so then we look at ourselves and go, well, obviously, what are we going to do? We're nothing compared to Jesus Christ, and if people fail to see God in him, what could we hope to present? The answer is really simple. The kingdom of God was present in Jesus Christ and was effective through him by grace. And the same grace of God is present in us. It's present in the things that we do, not because we're so great, certainly not because we're perfect, not even because we're capable, but because it's God who wants it and who puts it there. God gives the grace. So when we look at this idea that we are the kingdom of God here on earth, we can realize that we're certainly not worthy, that we're certainly not capable, but we can also realize that this is a tremendous privilege that we have, that in spite of our frailty, God chooses to work in us and with us, to bring people to him. And do people not want to listen, like it seems that the Pharisees did not want to listen to Jesus Christ today? Quite possibly, but that doesn't stop the gospel being proclaimed through us, because everything we do when we do it for Jesus Christ bears fruit, one way or another. Why? Because it bears fruit through grace. Jesus then looking at ourselves like this and looking at you, looking at all the fruit that you bore in the gospel and that you have borne throughout eternity. Well, first of all, we thank you again for the privilege of being with you, for the privilege of having you, for the joy of having you. And then we ask you to send forth your grace in us more and more, to give us the courage and the strength to go out and talk, and not merely to do so without fear, but to do so with a tremendous optimism, knowing that the grace that comes from you opens the doorway to heaven for many people around us. We thank you tremendously for that privilege, and we ask you tremendously to make it bear fruit. And as we do that now, we end our prayer going to the Blessed Virgin Mary, your mother, and we ask her, our mother, to accompany us and teach us to accompany others in their path to God, because you knew and you know better than anyone else what it is to walk alongside God, and what it is to walk the path to heaven, what it is to be a member of the kingdom of God on earth and of the kingdom of God in heaven. I thank you, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations which you have communicated to me in this time of prayer. I ask your assistance in putting them into effect. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.